He was proclaimed rock music's next big thing in 1975, and he became the real thing with albums like Born to Run, Darkness on the Edge of Town, Born in the USA, and many more. Now, Bruce Springsteen tells his own story in a memoir. Jeffrey Brown paid him a visit to hear firsthand.
In his new memoir, Bruce Springsteen looks back at his young, struggling, and then little-known self and writes, "I was not modest in the assessment of my abilities. Of course, I thought I was a phony. That is the way of the artist. But I also thought I was the realest thing you'd ever seen."
That's right. Most artists I know consider themselves to be phonies, you know, along with feeling that there's something that you're doing that is essential to communicate, and deeply, deeply real.
Springsteen has been rocking his way through marathon, arena-sized concerts for decades. A kind of working-class rock and roll hero to millions of devoted fans. In the recording studio he built at his rural New Jersey home, we talked about becoming Bruce Springsteen, the story he tells in his book, Born to Run.
It was a very different type of writing from songwriting.
In what way?
A pop song is a condensed version of a life in 3 minutes. Whereas when you go to write your prose, you have to find a rhythm in your words, and you have to find your rhythm in the voice that you found and the way you're speaking.
What about that voice, though? Because in songs, and you know, I think of writers I've talked to or poets, and they're always the question of how much of that is you.
I say in your memoir, it's you. You know, I think that when you're writing your songs, there's always a debate about whether is that you in the song, is it not you in the song.
What's the answer?
So every song has a piece of you in it, because just general regret, love. You know, you have to basically zero in on the truth of those particular emotions, and then you can fill it out in any character and in any circumstance that you want. If you've written really well, people will swear that it happened to you.
Springsteen grew up in the working-class town of Freehold, New Jersey, of Italian and Irish stock. Adored and spoiled by his mother and grandparents, ignored and denigrated by a brooding, drinking, distant father, a figure who would obsess him personally and musically.
Initially, I had my conversations with him through my music, and that was the most effective, not the greatest way to do it, but it was the most effective for us.
I mean, but you write early on, when my dad looked at me, he didn't see what he needed to see. That's kind of, well, you're going, yeah, now, but I mean, that's hard when you're a young boy.
It is hard. It is hard. I think that it's a natural thing for parents to look for reflections of themselves in their children and feel a certain pride there. So if your child is very, very different, or perhaps if he's very, very similar, it makes you uncomfortable, you know. So there was a lot of that when I was young, and it took a long time to get through.
Papa, go to bed now, it's getting late. Nothing we can say is gonna change anything now.
Reconciliation would come later, along with an understanding of the role of depression in his father's life and his own. From the beginning, though, the young Springsteen showed a ferocious drive and sense of his own mission. First as a king of the bar bands in Central and South Jersey. I started to make a list of the clubs you played early on. These are not high-rent places, right? The
No,
Angle Inn Trailer Park, Cavatelli's Pizza, the IB Club, Surf and Sea Beach Club, Long Branch Italian-American Club, the Pandemonium Club. You probably remember each and every one of them.
Yeah, I remember those a lot more than some of the Madison Square Gardens and other things.
Is that right?
Of course. They were all so distinctive in their own way, and they all drew their own little clique of kids, and it was such a formative moment in your life that you know, you were just coming into being. You write about your voice. You say, about my voice, first of all, I don't have much of one. Yeah. Right? But you worked at it. initially just sounded awful, just so terribly awful, but there was nothing I could do about it. So I just kept singing, kept singing, kept singing. And I studied other singers, so I'd learn how to phrase and learn how to breathe. And but the main thing was I learned how to inhabit my song.
Which means what?
You know, what you were singing about was believable and convincing. That's the key to a great singer. A great singer has to learn how to inhabit a song. You may not be able to hit all the notes, that's okay. You may not have the clearest tone, you may not have the greatest range, but if you can inhabit your song, you know, you can communicate.
The early songs, though, are what I would call like word drunk. I mean, there's so many words in there that you're barely catching your breath as you're singing them.
Now the flag of piracy flew from my mast. My sails were set wing to wing.
Well, I was influenced by Dylan very intensely, and I had a rhyming dictionary. A man armed with a rhyming dictionary is a dangerous man. Yeah, the words came fast and furious.
A dictionary, and more important, a great band, the E Street Band, which included singer Patti Scialfa, his wife since 1991. Springsteen never liked his nickname, the Boss.
I had no credit cards, I had no checks, I was cash only till I was probably 30 years old.
But the Boss is what he became, deciding early on that to endure, he would have to treat music like a business.
Well, that has to happen. You know, if you're a band leader, you know, you need that type of discipline and dedication in the guys you're playing with. We came from where professionalism was not a dirty word, as I say. And so we worked like the old soul bands worked, very intensely and very methodically, in great detail.
Yeah, I mean, you even call it a benevolent dictatorship.
That's what it is.
That's what it is.
Small unit democracy, I found early on, didn't work for me. And the band contributes enormously. I wouldn't have gotten anywhere near where I was without them. But it's basically the buck stops here sort of situation.
But are you a control freak? I mean, that's sort of I think
yes,
you say that. Yeah.
Yes, I am. Probably less now than I used to be. I think when I was young, because you're insecure, you're really, you know, you're very controlling. Now I'm moderately controlling, I would say.
But you use that word insecure because, I mean, frankly, I mean, I'm reading this and it's such a mix of sort of insecurities and sense of self.
That's the artist's way.
That's the artist's way. Explain that to me.
Most artists I know had one person in their life who told them they were the second coming of the baby Jesus, and another person who told them they weren't worth anything, and they believed them both, you know. And so you go through the rest of your life in pursuit of both of those things, proving that both of those things are true. And you feel like the burden of proof is on you. It doesn't matter what happened last night or the night or tomorrow night. It's all about what you're doing with this audience right now. And insecurity, natural part of being an artist.
It was always there.
Along with a driving ego, vanity, and the self-confidence. So you got to have both of those things. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes you want to watch someone or want to listen to someone, are those particular complexities.
My conversation with Bruce Springsteen continues tomorrow night with a look at his lifelong bouts of depression, his love of reading, and the election of Donald Trump. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown.
Part 2 of Jeffrey Brown's conversation with Bruce Springsteen. The working-class rock and roll hero talks about his lifelong bouts of depression, his love of reading, and the election of Donald Trump.
On a visit with Bruce Springsteen at his home in rural New Jersey, most of the talk, of course, was about music, the core of his life and career. But part of the story he tells about his rise to the world stage also involved books, what he describes in his memoir as his self-education.
I think when I discovered the Russian guys, they were...
The Russians did it?
That was a big thing.
You mean like the big hitters, like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and those guys?
Yeah, when I got into Anna Karenina and Brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment, that was stuff that had a big effect on me because it was so psychological.
Does your reading affect your writing as a songwriter?
I think it affects you internally in a way that's not immediately evident, but that it simply increases your frame of reference. You know, you learn more about the craft of writing, what good writing feels like, but mostly it just enlarges you as an individual. You know, the one thing I wish for my children is that they be readers, you know. And
well, and are they? Because that's what I was going to ask you, because nowadays...
No.
Their father didn't make himself a reader until around 30, so the kids in their 20s still have time. By that point, Springsteen had become a major rock star. But in his 30s, he also suffered a serious bout of depression, something he would struggle with throughout his life, including an episode as recently as his early 60s, all while keeping up a rigorous touring and recording career. Springsteen, now 67, credits his wife Patty and years of counseling and antidepressants with getting him through. He writes candidly of these struggles in his new memoir.
It was a big enough part of my life to where it felt like it needed to be included in the book, you know. And also, I think it was an insight into some of your creative fire, where it comes from, you know. The premise of the book was to give my audience an insight into how I created and what were what's the fuel for the fire.
I mean, you see them as twined. I mean, it's you know, there's the kind of trope of many artists of creativity and madness.
Mental illness and creativity are, you know, it's a thin line in between the two. I tend to believe that. I mean, I don't know many artists who are not crazy. Most of the artists I know are crazy in one way or another. I think that's why you get into it. You're in pursuit of a certain sort of peace that's very, very, very difficult to come by. And I realized the only time I felt complete and peaceful was while I was playing or shortly afterwards. Even though it was in front of thousands of other people, which most people wouldn't consider to be a safe place.
No, they wouldn't. So why is that a safe place?
For me, it's always been. For me, once I count the band in and I delve deep into my song, I feel a certain sort of integrity and integration that I rarely find in my daily life. You know, it's better now than it used to be, but it's still something that if I want to deeply experience it, I walk on stage, I play, I perform, I create, I write, and that's where sort of that peace comes over me.
Just as sure as the hand of God, they brought death to my hometown.
As he matured as an artist, Springsteen's music took on issues of the political culture.
No home, no job, no peace, no rest.
Vietnam, poverty, those left behind in the 2008 recession.
I integrated it because, you know, politics and life go hand in hand. And so it needed to be a part of my music, just the different social forces that affected my parents' lives or my friends' lives or I saw around me became essential for me to write about.
He also became more upfront in his own politics, joining Barack Obama on the campaign trail, and in the recent election, supporting Hillary Clinton.
I was going around the world swearing. I was betting on Hillary going around the world, interview after interview.
And you were wrong,
yeah.
Like with many people.
Yeah.
But what explains it?
I think a lot of things. I think that people with legitimate concerns about how you're going to live, where you're going to find your jobs, deindustrialization that I've written about for 40 years, left a good part of the American public behind. And I think somebody comes up and simply says, your jobs, I'm going to bring them back. You're not comfortable with the browning of America? I'm going to build a wall. ISIS, I'm going to defeat them. Those are very, it's a simple, but it was a compelling message for a lot of people. And
But these are the people that you've been writing about for all these years.
yes, that's true.
So did you lose touch with them? Did they lose touch with you?
It was just a very divided country, you know, a very divided country. And I don't really know another way to explain it. While I didn't think that Donald Trump's message was credible enough to affect the vote to that degree, I was wrong, and it was.
Meet me in a land of hope and dreams.
In this book, you talk about telling your story, but also telling our story, which has come through in your music, right? Telling a story of this country. How do we bridge divides in this country?
I think you can't demonize somebody that's on the other side of the political spectrum, or you can't generalize about them, you know. I know people on both sides of that particular divide, and they just have a different opinion about it, you know. So I think that maybe look outside your own daily experience also, you know, which is something that as a writer, that was sort of something that that meant a great deal to me, you know. That's probably, I mean, that's been my story to tell over the past 40 years. And there's common ground in it, but it's going to take a while to see where it goes.
All you gotta do is
In the meantime, the music continues. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band head to Australia and New Zealand at the beginning of the new year. From Central New Jersey, I'm Jeffrey Brown for the PBS NewsHour.
A remarkable, rare interview with that man. You can watch the full 40-minute interview with Bruce Springsteen on our homepage, pbs.org/newshour.